I was standing on my mother's front porch, holding a 146 kitchen faucet, when my brother told me I needed permission to come inside. For a few seconds, I honestly thought Gavin was joking. I had bought the house 18 months earlier. My name was on the mortgage. My bank account paid the property taxes, and the only reason I was there that Saturday morning was because Mom had called me 2 days earlier and said the kitchen faucet had started leaking again. But when I punched in the keypad code I'd used since the day she moved in, the lock flashed red. I tried again. Same result. Then Gavin opened the door, stepped into the frame, and didn't move. You can't just show up anymore, Elowen. Behind him, my mother stood near the kitchen doorway with her arms folded, staring at the floor. I looked from Gavin to her, then back to him. I'm sorry, what? He exhaled through his nose like I was the one making the situation difficult. Mom deserves some privacy. We all do. Just call before you come over. I glanced down at the box in my hands. The picture on the front showed the exact faucet Mom had picked from a hardware store website on Thursday night. She asked me to bring this. Gavin shrugged. That doesn't mean you walk in whenever you feel like it. Something about the way he said walk in made the whole thing feel stranger. Not visit, not stop by. Walk in. Like I was trespassing, I looked past him. Mom, she finally raised her eyes. Maybe just call first next time, honey. It would avoid tension. I waited for more. There wasn't any. No, Gavin shouldn't have changed the code. No, of course you're not a stranger here. Nothing. I shifted the faucet box under one arm. Did you ask him to change the code? Mom rubbed her thumb across the side of her hand. We talked about making things a little more organized. Gavin gave me a look that said the discussion was over. I could have pushed past him. Legally, I probably had every right to. I could have demanded the new code, reminded him whose name was on every document attached to the property, or made all three of us miserable right there on the porch. Instead, I set the faucet carefully beside the welcome mat. Okay, I said. Gavin blinked, almost disappointed. Okay, you want me to call first? I heard you. I looked at Mom again. The plumber's number is in your phone. Have him install that before the leak gets worse. Then I walked back to my car. I didn't slam the door. I didn't call anyone. I just sat behind the wheel for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel, watching the house through the windshield. It was a small 2-bedroom brick place on a quiet street outside Columbus. Nothing extravagant. When Dad died 3 years earlier, Mom had stayed in the apartment they'd rented together because moving felt like admitting he wasn't coming back. Then the rent went up. Then it went up again. By the time she called me crying over another renewal notice, I had enough saved for a down payment on a modest house. I was 30 at the time, working as a commercial kitchen project coordinator, and I wasn't rich. I just happened to be good at budgets and very bad at letting people I loved panic alone. So I bought the house. Mom paid a small amount toward utilities. I handled the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and major repairs. The arrangement was simple because it was supposed to be. She got security, I got peace of mind. Gavin wasn't part of the arrangement. He arrived 15 months later after his apartment lease ended. 3 weeks. Mom had told me. Just until he finds something. Gavin was 36, 5 years older than me, and 3 weeks had always had a strange way of stretching around him. Growing up, when Gavin got into trouble, Mom said he was finding himself. When I got overwhelmed, she told me I was strong. For years, I had taken that as a compliment. Sitting outside that house, I wasn't so sure anymore. My phone buzzed. A payment notification appeared from my mortgage app. Scheduled payment Monday. I almost laughed. I had just been told I needed permission to visit a house I was still paying for in 48 hours. Then another notification came in. Mom, please don't make this about the house. I read it twice. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them. Eventually, I drove home without answering. My apartment was 25 minutes away, on the 2nd floor of a building I had rented for almost 4 years. I dropped my keys on the counter, changed out of my work clothes, and opened my laptop. Normally, I didn't look closely at the house expenses unless something unusual happened. The mortgage was automatic. Insurance was automatic. Utilities came out of a separate account. I had built the whole system specifically so Mom would never have to worry about it. That afternoon, for the first time in months, I opened every statement. The electric bill had climbed. That made sense with another person living there. Water was higher too. What caught my attention was the internet charge. It had jumped by almost $60. I clicked into the account. The plan had been upgraded to the highest speed package 2 months earlier. There was also a streaming bundle I had never chosen. I scrolled farther down. The contact name had been updated. Gavin Mercer. I stared at it for a long moment, not because $60 would ruin me. It wouldn't, but nobody had asked. I pulled up the utility history. 3 months. That was how long Gavin had been living there now. 3 months since his lease ended. 3 months since Mom said he needed only a little time to get back on his feet. I called her. She answered quickly. Hi, honey. How long is Gavin staying? Silence. What do you mean? I mean exactly what I asked. What's his move out date? Elowen, we just had this conversation. No. This morning we talked about me needing permission to enter the house. I'm asking something different. She sighed. Who's doing better? That's good. When is he leaving? Why does there have to be a deadline? I leaned back in my chair. There it was. Not an answer. An assumption. Gavin was no longer visiting. He was no longer staying for 3 weeks. Somewhere along the way, without anyone actually saying it to me, the arrangement had changed. Mom kept talking. He helps me with groceries. He takes the trash out. He's here if I need something. You're always working. That last part landed harder than it should have. Mom, I bought you the house. I know that. Her voice softened. And I'm grateful. But you bought it for me? I looked at the payment schedule glowing on my laptop screen. Exactly. Then shouldn't I get to decide who stays with me? I opened my mouth and stopped, because she had finally asked the question that made this complicated. It wasn't Gavin's house. It wasn't legally Mom's either. But I had bought it so she could feel like it was hers. Had I given her a home if I still expected a vote in who lived there? Or had Gavin figured out that my promise to Mom could be used to make me responsible for choices I was no longer allowed to question? I need to think about that, I said. Mom sounded relieved. Good, that's all I'm asking. After we hung up, I went back through the statements. Higher electric, higher water. Upgraded internet, new subscriptions, none of it was catastrophic. That was almost the point. Every change was small enough to ignore by itself. I opened a blank spreadsheet and typed 3 headings across the top. Who lives there? Who decides? Who pays? Then I sat back and stared at the screen. I had gone to Mom's house that morning, thinking I was fixing a leaky faucet. By that evening, I was beginning to realize the leak I needed to worry about wasn't under the kitchen sink, it was the arrangement itself. And I had no idea yet how much Gavin had already changed while I wasn't looking. By Monday morning, I knew 2 things for certain. First, Gavin had been living in Mom's house long enough to stop thinking of himself as temporary. Second, I had been paying for changes I didn't even know existed. I printed the last 6 months of statements and spread them across my dining table before work. Electric had gone up. Water had gone up. Internet had jumped the most. There was also a streaming package, a cloud storage add-on, and something labeled Priority Equipment Support that I had never seen before. None of it was enough to make me panic. Altogether, the increase was maybe a couple $100 a month. But that wasn't what bothered me. What bothered me was the pattern. Every change had happened after Gavin moved in. Every change had been made without asking me. And every bill still landed in the same account with my name on it. I called the internet company during my lunch break. The customer service representative confirmed the plan had been upgraded 2 months earlier. The request came from the authorized household contact, she said. Gavin Mercer. I looked down at my notebook. Authorized by who? There was a pause while she clicked through something. He was added as a contact through the online account. Can he change the billing plan? As a household contact? Yes. That answer irritated me more than it should have, because I knew exactly how it had happened. Months earlier, Mom had called because the WIP fee kept dropping. I had added Gavin so he could deal with the technician while I was at work. At the time, it felt practical. Now I was starting to understand how easily practical could turn into permanent. I removed his ability to make future billing changes, restored the original level of authorization, and left the current plan alone for the moment. I didn't want my first move to look like punishment. I wanted to understand what was actually going on. That evening, I asked Mom to meet me for coffee, not at the house. I didn't want Gavin listening from the next room or stepping into the conversation every time she hesitated. Mom arrived 10 minutes late wearing the blue cardigan Dad had bought her years ago. She hugged me like nothing had happened Saturday. That almost made it worse. We ordered coffee and sat near the window. For the first few minutes, she talked about ordinary things. A neighbor's new dog, grocery prices, a show she had started watching. I let her. Then I asked, "Is Gavin living with you permanently?" Her fingers tightened around her cup. "Why do you keep using that word?" "Because temporary has an end date." "He's helping me." "I didn't ask whether he's helping." "You make it sound like he's taking advantage of me." "I didn't say that either." She leaned back, already defensive. "He cooks sometimes. He picks up groceries. He drives me places when I don't feel like driving. Last week he fixed the cabinet hinge in the bathroom." "That's good." She blinked. I think she expected me to argue. "I mean it. If he's helping, that's good." "Then why are we doing this?" "Because I need to know what the arrangement is." Mom looked out the window. "Does everything have to be an arrangement with you?" There it was again. The thing people sometimes said when they benefited from structure but didn't want to admit structure existed. I kept my voice even. "When I bought the house, the arrangement was that you would live there. You'd contribute toward utilities. I'd handle the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and major repairs. That's what we agreed. And I've done that." "You have. But now another adult lives there." She looked back at me. "He's my son. He's also 36. Her mouth tightened. "He's had a hard year." I had heard that sentence in different forms for most of my life. Gavin had a hard semester. Gavin had a rough breakup. Gavin hated his manager. Gavin needed time. Gavin wasn't ready. Mom never said those things because she was stupid. She said them because worrying about Gavin had become one of the ways she understood motherhood. I was different. I was the child who figured things out. At 15, I found my own summer job. At 21, I learned how to change a flat tire because Dad said I shouldn't wait for someone else to do it. At 26, when a company I worked for downsized, I rebuilt my budget the same night and started applying for jobs the next morning. Mom loved telling people I was the strong one. I used to feel proud when she said it. I didn't understand until much later that being the strong one often meant no one checked whether you were tired. "I'm not asking you to put him on the street," I said. "I'm asking what he's planning." "He's taking freelance work." "From the house." Mom hesitated, that was my answer. "What kind of work?" "Design stuff. Websites, branding, something with videos." "I don't understand all of it." "Where is he working?" "Mostly the garage." I sat still. "The garage. Set up a desk out there. It keeps him out of the dining room." "What kind of setup?" Mom frowned. "A desk, shelves, computer things." "Elowen, why does it matter?" "Because I didn't know any of this." "You don't live there." She said it gently, not cruelly. That made it harder to dismiss. "I know. Gavin is there every day. If something breaks, he sees it. If I need milk, he can get it. If I don't feel well, there's someone in the next room." She paused. "You're always working." I stared at my coffee. There was enough truth in that sentence to make me uncomfortable. My job was demanding. Commercial kitchen projects rarely went exactly as planned. Equipment arrived late. Contractors missed deadlines. Clients changed layouts after cabinets had already been ordered. I could spend 10 hours dealing with a ventilation problem and still answer Mom's texts before bed. But I wasn't physically there. Gavin was. I understood why that mattered to her. What I didn't understand was why his presence seemed to erase the fact that I was making the entire setup possible. "I'm glad you're not alone," I said. "Really? But if Gavin is living there long term, I need to know that." Mom shook her head. "Why? Because it changes things? Like what? Utilities, insurance, who's making decisions in the house. What happens if he wants to make changes?" She gave me a tired look. "You bought it for me, Elowen." "I know." "Then let me live in it." I sat back. There was no point forcing the conversation farther that night. "Okay," I said. "But I'm not paying for new upgrades I didn't agree to." Her eyebrows lifted. "What upgrades?" "The internet package. The add-ons. Gavin needs better internet for work. Then Gavin can pay the difference." Mom's expression changed. Not anger exactly. More like disappointment. "It's $60. "I know. You can afford $60. There it was. I almost laughed, but nothing about it was funny. "That isn't the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is that nobody asked." Mom looked down at her cup. I let the silence sit between us. I wasn't going to argue about whether $60 was a lot. If I let the amount become the argument, we'd never talk about the actual issue. When we left, Mom hugged me again. She looked genuinely sad. For a moment I wondered whether I was making too much of everything. Maybe Gavin really was helping. Maybe changing a keypad code had been about privacy. Maybe the internet upgrade was just convenient. Maybe I was turning a messy family arrangement into a spreadsheet because spreadsheets were easier than feelings. Then, 3 days later, I drove over after Mom texted that she'd be home and that Gavin knew I was coming. The new code worked. That should have made me feel better. It didn't. The garage door was open when I pulled into the driveway. I slowed before parking. What had once held Mom's gardening tools, 2 bicycles, Dad's old workbench, and a stack of storage bins now looked like a small studio. A large desk sat against the wall. 2 monitors, lighting equipment, shelving, boxes with shipping labels, a rolling office chair, even a small refrigerator. Gavin stepped out carrying a bundle of cables. "Hey, I got out of the car. This is new." He glanced behind him. "Yeah, finally got it functional? Did you install all of this?" "Most of it." "Did you change anything permanent?" He gave me a look. "Permanent?" "Electrical, shelving, walls, anything attached to the property." "I added a couple outlets and had some old shelves removed." I stared at him. "You had electrical work done?" "Relax. It was basic." "Who did it?" "A guy I know. Licensed." His jaw tightened. "Elowen?" "I'm not an idiot." "I didn't say you were." "You're acting like I need permission to move a desk." "A desk isn't what I asked about." He dropped the cables on the workbench. "You know, Mom likes having me here." "I know. She feels safer." "I know." "Then maybe stop showing up like a property manager every time I make the place more useful." That sentence told me more than anything Mom had said at the cafe. Gavin didn't think he was borrowing space anymore. He thought he was improving his home. I looked around the garage again. "Is Tessa working from here too?" Tessa was Gavin's girlfriend. He paused just long enough. "Sometimes." "How often is she here?" "Why?" "Because I'm trying to understand who's actually living in the house." He laughed without humor. "There it is." "There what is?" "This thing you do. Everything becomes rules and numbers." I folded my arms. "And everything becomes temporary until nobody remembers it was supposed to end." His face changed. "Just slightly. Mom wants me here." "That may be true." "Then that should be enough." I looked toward the kitchen window. Mom was standing inside watching us. "Maybe for her," I said. "Not for every decision attached to the property." Gavin shook his head. You really hate not being in control. The comment landed because part of me wondered if he was right. I didn't answer. I went inside, checked on Mom, looked at the faucet the plumber had installed, and stayed exactly 40 minutes. When I got home, I logged into the internet account and changed one thing. I didn't downgrade the service. Not yet. I simply removed the automatic approval for future upgrades and added a note requiring my authorization for billing changes. Then I called Mom. I'm not asking Gavin to leave, I said, but from now on, if something changes the cost of the house, somebody asks me first. She sighed. Elowen, that's not negotiable. It was the first time I had said those words to her in years. My stomach tightened immediately afterward, but I didn't take them back. The next morning, just before 9, my phone rang while I was reviewing equipment drawings at work. I almost ignored the unfamiliar number. I answered on the 4th ring. Is this Elowen Mercer? Yes. This is Ray Delgado. I did some work at your property on Bellevue Lane. I slowly put down my pen. What work? There was a pause. The garage? I looked through the glass wall of my office at coworkers, moving between desks. I never hired anyone to work on the garage. Ray sounded confused. Your brother said you owned the place and would handle the invoice. I stopped breathing for half a second. Then I pulled a blank sheet of paper toward me. Tell me exactly what he asked you to do. Ray's explanation took less than 5 minutes, but by the end of it I had written down 3 things I had never approved. Gavin had asked him to remove old shelving from the garage, add 2 electrical outlets near the desk area, and patch part of the wall where a previous storage rack had been mounted. None of it sounded catastrophic. That was becoming a theme. Nothing Gavin did was dramatic enough to justify a family emergency by itself. It was always just reasonable enough to make me feel unreasonable for objecting. Did he tell you he owned the house? I asked. Not exactly, Ray said. He said it was his mom's place and that his sister handled the property stuff. I stared at the words I had written. Handled the property stuff. Somehow that bothered me more than if Gavin had outright lied. It reduced everything I was carrying, the mortgage, insurance, taxes, repairs, to administrative background noise. How much is the invoice? $842. I closed my eyes for a second. And how much of that work has already been completed? All of it. Okay. Email me the invoice and a description of exactly what was done. Don't do anything else at that address unless you hear directly from me. Ray sounded embarrassed. I'm sorry. I thought, I know, this isn't your fault. After we hung up, I sat there staring at the number. $840. $2 wasn't going to destroy me. But if I paid it without saying anything, the message would be simple, Gavin could make decisions, and I would absorb the consequences. I texted him. Need to talk tonight about the garage work. He replied almost immediately. Sure, not defensive, not apologetic, just sure. That told me he still didn't think he had done anything wrong. I drove to the house after work. Mom was at the kitchen table sorting coupons when I arrived. Gavin was in the garage. The moment I stepped inside, I noticed something missing from the hallway near the mudroom. Dad's cabinet. It had been a narrow oak storage cabinet he and I restored together when I was 22. We found it at an estate sale, scratched and missing one hinge. Dad taught me how to strip the old finish, sand it properly, and rebuild the bottom shelf. After he died, Mom kept gardening gloves, batteries, flashlights, and random household things in it. Where's Dad's cabinet? I asked. Mom looked up. What cabinet? The oak one. She hesitated. Gavin moved it. Where? Storage, I think. I turned toward the garage. Gavin was plugging a monitor into the wall. Where did you put Dad's cabinet? He glanced over. That old thing. I felt my shoulders tighten. Yes, that old thing. It was taking up space. I put it in a storage unit with some other stuff Mom wasn't using. Whose storage unit? Mine? Why didn't anyone ask me? He gave me the same expression he'd used every time I raised a question. like I was turning something simple into a federal investigation. Because it's furniture, Elowen. It was Dad's. And now it's in storage. It didn't disappear. Mom came to the doorway behind me. Honey, he needed the wall space. I looked at her. You were okay with him moving it. I didn't think you cared that much about a cabinet. There was no accusation in her voice. That was what made it hurt. She genuinely didn't understand. Dad and I had worked on that thing for 3 weekends. It wasn't valuable. Nobody would have paid more than a couple $100 for it. But I could still remember him handing me the sandpaper and saying, "Don't rush the corners. People always rush what they think nobody will notice." I swallowed and turned back to Gavin. "I want it out of your storage unit." He sighed. "Seriously?" "Yes." "Fine. I'll get it when I have time." "No." "Give me the address and unit number." "I'll get it." "Why are you making this into a thing?" "Because I'm telling you I want something that belonged to Dad. And instead of saying okay, you're arguing about whether I'm allowed to care." He looked at Mom, almost inviting her to translate me into something more manageable. She rubbed her forehead. "Can we please not fight over this?" "I'm not fighting." I held out my hand. "The storage information." Gavin stared at me for a few seconds, then pulled out his phone and sent it. "They're happy." "No. But now I can fix one part of the problem myself." I hated how sharp that sounded, but I didn't take it back. I went into the kitchen and put my bag on the counter. Ray called me. Gavin leaned against the doorway. "Who?" "The contractor." His expression barely changed. "Oh, yeah. It says I owe $842. It's work on your property." There it was, so cleanly stated that I almost admired it. I looked at him. "Say that again." "I said it's your property." "Interesting." Mom frowned. "Elowen." I kept my eyes on Gavin. "When you changed the keypad code, you said I couldn't just walk in because I don't live here. When you turned the garage into your office, you said Mom wants you here, so that should be enough. When you changed the internet, nobody needed to ask me. But when an invoice shows up, suddenly it's my property." Gavin's jaw tightened. "That's not what I meant." "It's exactly what you meant. You own the house. Repairs are your responsibility. Repairs are. Your workspace isn't. I improved the garage. You improved it for yourself. Mom benefits from the property being nicer too." I almost laughed. "You removed storage, moved Dad's cabinet, added outlets for your equipment, and now you're explaining how Mom benefits. Why does everything have to be about who paid for what?" "Because you keep making choices with my money." Mom stepped between us emotionally, if not physically. "Please, both of you." Gavin shook his head. "This is what I mean. You show up and suddenly everyone has to explain themselves. I showed up because a contractor called me for payment. You don't live here." The words were quieter this time, more deliberate. I looked at him for several seconds. "Then stop spending like I do." Silence. Mom looked down. Gavin folded his arms. "You know what? Maybe the real problem is that you never actually gave Mom the house. You bought it so you could keep control." I felt that one. He knew exactly where to aim. "What are you talking about? If you really bought it for her, why does she need your approval for everything?" "She doesn't." "Apparently she does." "No. You do when your decisions create bills in my name." "Same difference." "No, it isn't." He pushed away from the doorway. "Maybe you should just put the house in Mom's name. Then you wouldn't have to worry about any of this." Mom looked between us quickly. "Gavin." "What?" "It makes sense." He turned back to me. "You keep saying it's for her. Prove it." For a moment, nobody spoke. I realized then that the house had moved into a new category in Gavin's mind. This wasn't just about living there anymore. He was testing the idea that ownership itself was unfair because I still held it. "I'm not transferring anything," I said. "Of course not." He gave a short laugh. "Because then you'd lose your leverage." I could have answered emotionally. I wanted to. instead. I pulled Ray's invoice from my bag. This is $842. I spoke with him about the work. The electrical repair that protects the property is my responsibility. The modifications specifically for your workspace are yours. Gavin stared at me. You're serious? Completely? You want me to pay you for improving the house? I want you to pay for work you authorized for your business. I don't have $800 lying around. That was the first truly useful piece of information he had given me. Not because I was happy he was short on money, because for weeks everyone had been talking as though Gavin was rebuilding his life successfully, making money, contributing, becoming stable. Yet the first time one of his decisions came with an actual cost, he looked cornered. I lowered my voice. Then we'll separate the invoice and you can pay your portion over time. Mom looked relieved. Gavin did not. Family doesn't invoice family. Family also doesn't hire contractors and send the bill to someone else. His face hardened. You really want to do this? No. I wanted Mom to have a safe house where she didn't have to worry about rent. I didn't want any of this. He looked away first. That mattered more than I expected. The next morning before work, I drove to Gavin's storage unit. The cabinet was shoved behind 2 plastic bins and a folded table. One corner had been scratched, but otherwise it was fine. I loaded it into the back of my SUV by myself. My co-worker Maren helped me move it into a small storage locker near my apartment that evening. That thing must be important, she said, wiping dust from her hands. It is. She studied my face but didn't ask for the whole story. I appreciated that. Before leaving, I ran my hand across the top of the cabinet. Dad had been right about corners. You learned a lot about people by what they thought nobody would notice. Later that night, I opened the house expense spreadsheet again. I added Ray's invoice. Then I added the internet upgrade, extra utilities, the subscriptions. It was the first time I stopped looking at the situation as one big emotional argument and started looking at what had actually changed. Gavin wanted his choices treated like household decisions. Fine. But he wanted the consequences treated like mine. That was the part I was done with. I texted him a breakdown of his portion of the contractor bill and suggested 4 monthly payments. He didn't answer for 2 hours. When he finally did, the message contained one sentence: if you don't trust us to live there, maybe you should just give Mom the house. I read it twice. Then a third time. He had said something similar in anger earlier. Seeing it written down felt different. Maybe Gavin wasn't only defending his right to stay. Maybe he had started believing the house should permanently move out of my hands. And for the first time, since he changed that keypad code, I wondered whether getting inside the house was even the biggest thing I needed to protect anymore. The question that finally forced everything into the open came from an insurance form. About 2 weeks after the contractor call, I received the annual renewal questionnaire for the house. Most of it was routine: roof age, heating system, smoke detectors, whether anything significant had changed on the property. Then I reached the occupancy section: number of permanent residents, any business activity conducted from the property, any material changes in use since the previous policy period. I sat at my desk reading those 3 questions over and over. A few months earlier, I would have answered without thinking: 1 permanent resident, no business activity, no significant change. Now I couldn't answer honestly because nobody in my family seemed willing to define what Gavin was doing there. I called Mom that evening. I need to come by tomorrow and talk to you. She went quiet. About what? The house. Elowen, I really don't want another argument. Neither do I. That's why I want to talk to you alone. She hesitated before agreeing. Gavin has a client meeting around 6. Come then. The next evening, I arrived at 6:15. I had called first. I hated that I noticed myself doing it. Mom opened the door before I could enter the code. She had made tea and put out a plate of crackers, like we were about to discuss holiday plans, instead of the thing neither of us wanted to name. I sat across from her at the dining table, and place the insurance form between us. I need accurate information for the renewal. She glanced down. Okay. I pointed to the occupancy question. Has Gavin living here permanently? Her shoulders dropped. We've talked about this. We've talked around it. Why does a word matter so much? Because temporary means he intends to leave. Permanent means this is his home. I need to know which one we're dealing with. He doesn't know what his plans are yet. It's been more than 3 months. He's building his business. That doesn't answer me. She pushed the paper away slightly. You're making this sound so official. It is official. I'm filling out an insurance form. You know what I mean. I did. She wanted the benefits of keeping everything undefined. If Gavin was temporary, nobody had to discuss what his presence changed. If he was permanent, then questions about expenses, use of the property, boundaries, and responsibility became harder to avoid. Does he receive mail here? I asked. Some. Does he keep all his clothes here? Probably. Does he sleep anywhere else regularly? No. Is he looking for another apartment? She didn't answer. Mum? Not right now. Then he lives here. He's my son. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. Her face tightened. Why are you so determined to make this a problem? I leaned back. I'm not. I'm trying to define the problem that already exists. She looked toward the kitchen. Helps me, Elowen? I know. When the porch light stopped working, he fixed it. He picks up my prescriptions, he cooks. Sometimes we watch movies at night. Do you know how quiet this house was before he moved in? That stopped me. For a second, the insurance form disappeared from the conversation. Mom looked older than 60, one sitting across from me. Dad's death had changed the rhythm of her life in ways I probably hadn't understood because I was so focused on fixing the practical parts. Rent, bills, repairs, housing. Gavin gave her something I couldn't put into an automatic payment. Another person in the room. I'm glad he's here for you, I said. Then why can't you leave this alone? Because him being good company doesn't answer who is responsible for his choices. She looked frustrated. What choices? The garage, the contractor, the internet, changing the keypad. Tessa being there all the time. Tessa doesn't live here. Fine, then tell me who does. Mom pressed her lips together. Me and Gavin. It was the first time she had said it plainly. I nodded. Okay, she looked surprised. Okay, yes. Now I know? So that's it. No, now we figure out what that means. Her expression changed immediately. There? That's exactly what I was afraid of. I stared at her. Afraid of what? That if I said he lived here, you'd start making rules. I didn't answer right away. That admission mattered. Mom hadn't simply failed to notice the arrangement changing. She had noticed and avoided telling me because she knew clarity might cost something. So you knew I thought this was temporary. She rubbed her fingers together on the tabletop. I knew you wanted it to be temporary. Because that's what you told me. Things changed. And nobody thought I needed to know. Why should every decision have to go through you? Her voice rose for the first time. Because I'm responsible for the property. But you're not the one living here. The room went very still. Mom seemed to realize immediately that she had said something important, but she didn't take it back. I looked around the dining room. The table had been mine before I bought the house. The refrigerator was one I had replaced when Mom's first one died. The roof repair from last winter had come out of my emergency savings. None of those things meant I should control her daily life. I knew that. But apparently the opposite rule had quietly developed, because I didn't live there. My responsibility mattered only when something needed paying for. Then why does every bill still belong to me? I asked. Mom's face changed. That's not fair. Which part? Making everything about money? I'm not. It sounds like you are. No, I'm asking why my responsibility is permanent, but my voice is considered interference. She looked away. Never asked you to buy me this house. That one hurt, not because it was entirely true, she hadn't demanded it, I had offered. But I remembered the night she called, after getting her rent renewal, trying not to cry while telling me she might need to move farther away. I remembered spending 6 months looking at properties and running numbers until I found something I could afford. "You're right," I said quietly. "You didn't." She looked back at me, startled by the answer. "I chose to do it because I wanted you secure. And I am grateful. I know. But gratitude isn't what I'm asking for." "Then what do you want?" I thought about it. "I want choices to belong to the people who carry their consequences." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means if Gavin lives here permanently, that's a choice. If he uses the garage for work, that's a choice. If you want him here because you like having him here, that's a choice too. I'm not saying those choices are wrong. I'm saying I can't be the automatic financial answer attached to all of them." "So now you're going to charge your brother rent?" "I didn't say that." "Make me pay the mortgage?" "I didn't say that either." "Then, are you saying—" I looked at the insurance form between us. "I'm saying I need to figure out what is actually my responsibility and what I've been paying simply because everyone assumes I will." Mom shook her head slowly. "Family isn't supposed to work like that." "Maybe not. But family also shouldn't work by assuming the person who can handle the most should always carry the most." She went silent. For a second I almost apologized. That was my reflex. Say the hard thing, see Mom's face change. Soften it until nobody had to sit with discomfort. I didn't do it this time. I completed the insurance questions before leaving. 2 permanent residents. Business activity in the garage. Subject to whatever clarification the insurer needed. Accurate information. Nothing dramatic. At the front door, Mom said, "I hope you're not going to punish Gavin because you're angry." I turned around. "I'm not interested in punishing anybody." "It doesn't feel that way." "I haven't even done anything yet." "Exactly?" Her answer stayed with me the whole drive home. She was afraid of what I might stop doing. That was when I understood how much of our family arrangement depended on things I had never consciously agreed to keep providing. At my apartment, I opened the spreadsheet I had started after the keypad incident. This time, I deleted the 3 original headings: who lives there, who decides, who pays. I already had those answers. 2 people lived there. Mom and Gavin made most of the daily decisions. I paid for far more than either of them seemed to notice. I created 2 new columns: property obligation, lifestyle support. Under the first, I listed mortgage, taxes, insurance, structural repairs, basic maintenance, and the expenses necessary to keep Mom safely housed. Under the second, I listed the premium internet difference, streaming bundles, extra household services, landscaping, convenient subscriptions, and every small upgrade I had agreed to over the years, because saying yes was easier than asking why I was paying. Then I totaled the second column. I sat back. The number wasn't enormous. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that almost none of it had ever been discussed. I had built a system where everyone else could make small choices because Elowen would handle it. And then I had gotten angry when they started treating that system like a permanent law of nature. I couldn't change what Gavin believed he deserved. I couldn't force Mom to see my contribution the way I wanted her to. But I could decide what happened to my own money from that point forward. I texted Mom before I could talk myself out of it. "Can we meet Saturday, just us? I want to explain what I'm changing so there are no surprises." Her reply came 5 minutes later. "What are you changing?" I looked at the 2 columns on my screen. For the first time, I knew exactly how to answer. "The house I promised you is safe, but I'm not paying for every choice made inside it anymore." I stared at the message for several seconds before pressing send. 3 dots appeared almost immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. Mom never sent a response, and somehow, her silence told me she understood exactly what was about to change. Mom chose a cafe halfway between my apartment and the house for our Saturday meeting. I arrived early because I wanted 5 quiet minutes before she got there. I had spent the previous night going over the numbers again, not because I needed more information, but because I knew what would happen once we sat down. The conversation would stop being about numbers almost immediately. It would become about love, family, generosity, and whether I was somehow punishing my mother because I was angry with my brother. I needed to know where my boundary was before somebody asked me to move it. Mom arrived carrying her purse against her chest. She didn't hug me this time. I barely slept, she said as she sat down. Why? Because of that message. I nodded. That's why I wanted to explain it in person. She looked at the folder beside my coffee. You brought paperwork. Just a list. That's paperwork. I almost smiled, but she wasn't joking. I pushed the folder aside instead of opening it. Okay, no list. I'll explain it. Mom folded her hands. Go ahead. Nothing changes about the mortgage. Nothing changes about property taxes, insurance, or necessary repairs. I'm not taking away your home. Some of the tension left her shoulders. Then what is changing? I'm not automatically paying for optional expenses created by other people's choices. Other people meaning Gavin. Sometimes. Sometimes you. Sometimes me. The point is that we talk about it first. She frowned. Give me an example. The upgraded internet. He needs that for work. Then he can pay the difference between the basic plan and the plan he needs for work. It's not that much. Then it shouldn't be difficult for him to cover. Her mouth tightened. I continued before she could redirect the conversation. The streaming bundle ends this month, unless you or Gavin want to keep paying for it. I'm cancelling the landscaping service when the current period ends. Gavin is 36 and lives there. He can mow the lawn, or you two can decide whether you want to hire someone, and any future work connected to his garage setup is his responsibility, unless it's something necessary to protect the property. Mom stared at me. You've really thought this through. Yes. It feels petty. I had expected that word. It still stung. Why? Because you've paid these things for years. Some of them. Others were added recently. But you can afford them. That doesn't make them mine. She looked toward the window. Gavin was right. About what? You're upset because you don't feel in control. I felt the old reflex rise immediately. Defend myself. Explain more. Convince her I was still a good daughter. Instead, I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. Maybe I was too involved before. If that's true, this should help. You and Gavin can decide what services you want, and you can pay for those decisions yourselves. She looked back at me. That isn't what I meant. I know. The silence lasted long enough that I could hear the espresso machine behind the counter. Finally, she said, I don't want money to ruin this family. Neither do I. Then why are we talking about $60 here and $40 there? Because the amount isn't the issue. If Gavin decided he wanted a $5 upgrade and expected me to pay without asking, I'd have the same problem. Mom shook her head. You've changed. I let that sit. Maybe I had. The house is safe, I said. You're safe. I'm keeping the promise I made you. But that promise doesn't mean every adult who lives there gets to make financial decisions for me. She didn't agree. But when we left the cafe, she understood the boundary. That mattered more. I made the changes that afternoon. The premium internet stayed active through the billing cycle. But I removed my payment method from the upgrade portion and sent Gavin the information he needed to take it over. I cancelled the streaming package. I gave notice on the landscaping service. None of it was dramatic. Nobody lost electricity. Nobody lost water. Mom wasn't left without anything essential. But Gavin called me before dinner. What the hell are you doing? I was in the grocery store comparing 2 brands of pasta sauce. His tone was so sharp that a woman beside me glanced over. Buying groceries? You know what I mean. I told Mom what was changing. You cancelled the streaming account. Yes. She watches that. Then you can restart it. Why should I? I put one jar back on the shelf. Because you want it. You're unbelievable. Gavin, I'm not having a 40-minute argument about streaming television. This isn't about streaming, and you know it. You're right. That stopped him for half a second. This is you punishing us because you can't control the house anymore. There it was. The accusation I had been preparing for. No. You can make whatever choices you want. I'm changing which choices I finance. Same thing? It isn't. How convenient. I pushed my cart toward the next aisle. Is there something specific you need from me? Yeah. Stop treating Mom like a tenant. Mom isn't paying me rent. You know what I mean. Actually, I don't think either of us knows what the other means anymore. He lowered his voice. You're using money to control people. For a moment, I didn't answer. That accusation bothered me because I knew money could be used that way. If I threatened to take away Mom's housing unless she did what I wanted, that would be control. If I shut off something essential to pressure Gavin into leaving, that would be control. I wasn't willing to become that person just because I was angry. You can stay, I said. Mom can decide she wants you there. You can use the garage within reasonable limits. You can choose whatever internet plan you want. You can subscribe to every streaming service in America if it makes you happy. I'm not stopping you. You're just making us pay? For the choices you make? Yes. Silence. You really rehearsed that, didn't you? Actually, no. You know what would solve all of this? I already knew what was coming. What? Put the house in Mom's name. I stopped beside a display of canned tomatoes. No. See. There it is. There what is. You need leverage. I need to protect an asset I'm financially responsible for. You always have an answer. Because you keep asking the same question. If it's really Mom's home, why are you so afraid to make it hers? I closed my eyes for a second. I'm done with this conversation. Of course you are. Good night, Gavin. I hung up before he could answer. My hands were shaking slightly when I put the phone in my pocket. Not because he had intimidated me, because part of what he said still found the exact weak spot in me. I had bought the house for Mom. I wanted her to feel secure there. So why did transferring ownership feel so obviously wrong? I knew the practical answers. I carried the mortgage. I had put down the money. I was responsible for the property. But Gavin wasn't arguing practicalities. He was making ownership into a test of love. 2 days later, I went to the house to deal with the garage invoice. Gavin had paid nothing yet. He was sitting at his desk when I walked in. This time, I had called first. We need to settle Ray's bill, I said. He swiveled his chair around. I told you I don't have $800. You don't owe $800. I handed him the breakdown. I separated the work. I'm covering the portion related to the property. Your part is $360. He looked at the paper. Seriously? Yes. I don't have $360 either. Then pay $90 a month for 4 months. He laughed once. You're putting your brother on a payment plan. I'm giving you a way to pay for work you ordered. Family doesn't invoice family. Family also doesn't hire contractors and tell them their sister will pay. His expression hardened, but this time I didn't feel the need to keep explaining. 90 by the end of the month, I said. After that, 90 each month until it's done. And if I don't, then there won't be any more non-essential work approved in the garage until it's settled. So you are controlling what I do. I'm controlling what happens to property I'm responsible for. He looked down at the invoice again. You really became a landlord overnight. No, I stopped pretending none of this needed rules. I left before the conversation could circle again. 11 days later, $90 appeared in my payment app from Gavin. No message, no apology, just the money. I stared at the notification longer than I should have. It wasn't the amount that mattered. For the first time since he moved in, one of Gavin's decisions had produced a consequence that didn't automatically land on me. That evening, Mom called. Her voice sounded careful. "Can I ask you something without you getting upset?" "You can ask." "Gavin thinks there's a way to stop all this fighting." "I already knew. He wants me to transfer the house." "Not to him," she said quickly. "To me?" "Mom, just listen. He says if the house were actually in my name, nobody would feel like you were holding it over us." I stood at my kitchen counter and stared through the window at the parking lot below. "Do you feel like I'm holding it over you?" She didn't answer immediately. That silence mattered. "I just want to feel secure," she said finally. "That's why I bought it." "But if it's for me, why shouldn't it be mine?" I leaned against the counter. Until that moment, I had been telling myself the ownership idea was Gavin's. Something he had thrown into arguments because it weakened my position. Now I understood he had succeeded in turning it into Mom's question too. "Is that what you want?" I asked. "I don't know." "Then think about it before we talk again." "You're not saying no." "I'm saying I want to know what you want, not what Gavin thinks would solve things." Her voice softened. "He's only trying to help." I looked at the $90 payment notification still sitting on my phone. Maybe he believed that. Maybe Mom did too. But the conflict had changed again. We weren't arguing about a keypad anymore. We weren't even arguing about bills. Gavin had taken the question all the way to ownership, and for the first time, Mom wasn't standing behind him silently. She was starting to ask the same thing herself. The first call came from my Aunt Nora on a Tuesday afternoon. I was standing outside a school cafeteria with a contractor, waiting for him to finish measuring a doorway, when my phone buzzed. I almost let it go to voicemail. Nora and I liked each other, but we weren't the kind of relatives who called just to talk. "Hey, Aunt Nora." "Elowen, do you have a minute?" Her voice already told me this wasn't social. I stepped away from the contractor. "Sure. I talked to your mother last night." I closed my eyes briefly. "Okay?" "She's worried." "About what?" "About the house." I leaned against the brick wall. "What specifically about the house?" Nora hesitated. "She thinks you might decide she can't stay there." For a second, I genuinely didn't know what to say. "I have never told Mom she has to leave." "I'm not accusing you of anything." "Then where did she get that idea?" Another pause. "Gavin said things have gotten tense." "Of course he had." "Did Gavin tell you I'm still paying the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and necessary repairs?" "Elowen, did he tell you I haven't asked Mom for rent?" "No." "Did he tell you what I actually stopped paying for?" Nora sighed. "I don't want to get in the middle." "Neither do I." "Your mother is 61. She lost your father. She finally feels settled. I just don't want this disagreement with Gavin to make her feel insecure again." That was the clever part of what Gavin was doing. He didn't need to tell anyone a dramatic lie. He only had to rearrange the facts. Elowen is changing what she pays became Elowen is using the house as leverage. Elowen refuses to transfer ownership became Elowen wants control. Mom is worried became Mom might lose her home. Every version contained enough truth that correcting it would require a 20-minute explanation. "Mom isn't losing her home," I said. "That's all I'm going to say." "Maybe you should tell the family that." "Why?" "So people understand." I looked through the cafeteria window at workers carrying stainless steel equipment into place. "This isn't a family vote." Nora went quiet. "I didn't mean it like that." "I know. But I'm not sending everyone receipts and screenshots so they can decide whether I'm being fair." "All right." Her voice softened. "Just talk to your mother." "I will." After we hung up, I stood outside another minute before going back to work. I had expected Gavin to push against the financial boundaries. I hadn't expected him to shift the argument from money to Mom's security. And that version bothered me, because there was one question I couldn't answer as easily as the others. What if Mom really did feel less secure because of me? That evening, I met Maren after work. She knew pieces of what had been happening because she had helped me move Dad's cabinet, but I hadn't given her the full story. We sat in a nearly empty sandwich shop while I explained the keypad, the garage, the bills, the contractor, and finally the ownership question. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, "What does your mom actually want?" "Security." "That's not what I asked." I frowned. "She wants Gavin there." "Okay. And she wants me to stop making an issue out of it." "That's two things." "Maren, I'm serious. She wants Gavin living with her, and she wants you to keep the arrangement financially easy. Those aren't automatically the same choice." I looked down at my drink. If I stop making it easy, it feels like I'm forcing her. Forcing her to do what? Choose. She's already choosing. I looked up. Maren leaned forward slightly. "You keep talking about your mom like she's caught between you and Gavin. Maybe she is emotionally, but she's still making decisions. She wants him there?" "Yes." "And you don't want to finance everything that comes with that." "Right." "Then the problem isn't that nobody has a choice. The problem is everybody wants their choice without the part they don't like." I didn't answer. "Including you," she added. That got my attention. What part am I avoiding? What happens if your mom chooses Gavin? The question landed differently from anything Gavin had said. He used mom's choice as pressure. Maren was asking whether I would actually respect it. "I don't know," I admitted. "Then maybe figure that out before you decide what's fair." I drove home thinking about it. I had spent weeks saying Mom was an adult who could decide who lived with her. But somewhere underneath that, I still expected her to eventually agree with me. I wanted her to say Gavin had gone too far. I wanted her to recognize what I had sacrificed and restore the original arrangement herself. That wasn't a boundary. That was an outcome I was hoping to control. 2 days later, Mom asked me to come over. Gavin was there when I arrived, which immediately told me the conversation had been planned. This time nobody blocked the door. We sat in the living room. Gavin spoke first. "Mom told you about transferring the house." "She did." "I think you're making it more complicated than it needs to be." "I haven't actually answered yet." "Then answer." Mom gave him a warning look. "Gavin." "What? We keep going in circles." He turned to me. "You say the house is Mom's home. Put it in her name. Then she knows nobody can use it against her." "Nobody is using it against her." "That's how it feels." "To you or to her?" "Both." I looked at Mom. "Is that how you feel?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. That hurt more than I expected." "When have I threatened your housing?" "You haven't." "Have I asked you to pay the mortgage?" "No." "Have I told you to leave?" "No." Gavin interrupted. "That's not the point." I turned toward him. "Then what is?" "The point is you can. Anytime you want. Everything depends on you deciding to keep being generous." There was something revealing in the way he said generous, like generosity was inherently unstable because it could end. "And transferring the house fixes that?" I asked. "Yes." "Who pays the mortgage?" He paused. "You could keep paying it." I almost smiled, not because it was funny, because there it was again, stripped down to its simplest form. My ownership was the problem. My financial responsibility was apparently not. "So you want me to give away the asset and keep the debt?" Gavin rolled his eyes. "You always reduce everything to money. You just proposed a financial arrangement." "For Mom." "Then let's talk about Mom." I turned to her. "Do you want the house transferred to you?" She looked uncomfortable. "I want everyone to stop fighting." "That's not the same thing." "I want to know this is my home." "It is your home." Gavin leaned forward. "Then prove it." I looked at him. "No." The word came out so calmly that all three of us went quiet. Gavin frowned. "No. I will not transfer the house." "Because you need control?" "No." Because I'm financially responsible for it. And I'm not giving away an asset I worked for while keeping the obligation attached to it. So much for doing it for Mom. I felt the accusation hit, but it didn't move me the way it had before. I did buy it for Mom. That doesn't mean every possible interpretation of that gift belongs to you. He stood up. Unbelievable. Mom looked close to tears. That was the moment when I could have retreated. Instead, I remembered Maren's question. What happens if Mom chooses Gavin? Mum, I said, I think I've been making one mistake through all of this. She looked at me cautiously. What? I keep trying to preserve the original arrangement, even though you may not want it anymore. Gavin stopped pacing. Mom frowned. I don't understand. I bought this house so you would have a secure place to live. At the time, that meant you living here. Just you. Now you want a different life. You want Gavin here permanently. He's my son. I know. And you're allowed to want that. Gavin stared at me, clearly waiting for the catch. I'm not transferring the house, I continued. But I'm also not going to decide how you should live. Mom's eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means we stop pretending there's only one possible arrangement. What other arrangement? I want a couple of days to think it through. Then I'll give you real choices, not threats. Choices. Gavin laughed. That sounds like the same thing with better wording. Maybe to you. I stood and picked up my bag. But there's one difference. Which is? I'm going to respect Mom's answer, even if it isn't the one I want. Mom watched me carefully. I could tell she didn't know whether to feel relieved or afraid. Neither did I. Back at my apartment, I sat at the dining table without opening my spreadsheet. This time, the answer wasn't in the numbers. I asked myself what I had avoided asking since the beginning. If Mom truly wanted to build a permanent household with Gavin, what did that mean for the house? I could keep paying for a property where I was treated as an outsider. I could force Gavin out and damage my relationship with Mom, or I could stop treating the house as the only possible way to keep my promise to her. That was when another thought surfaced, one I had barely allowed myself to consider. My apartment lease ended in 6 months. I liked my apartment, but I had been postponing decisions about my own future because so much of my financial planning revolved around Mom's house. What if she no longer wanted the arrangement I had created? What if I could use the house myself? The idea made me feel guilty almost immediately. Then I caught myself. There it was again. The belief that anything benefiting me had to be justified more carefully than anything benefiting Gavin. I opened a notebook and wrote 2 options. The first kept Mom in the house under the original arrangement, with Gavin given reasonable time to find his own place. The second respected Mom's choice to build a permanent household with Gavin somewhere they selected together, with limited help from me during the transition. After that, I would take the house back for my own use. Neither option abandoned Mom. Neither option gave Gavin what he wanted either. More importantly, neither required me to keep financing an arrangement I had never agreed to. I stared at the page for a long time before calling Mom. Can we talk Sunday? I asked. About the choices? Yes. She was quiet. Gavin wants to be there? I'd rather talk to you alone first. Another pause. Okay. Before we hung up, she said. Elowen? Yeah. What happens if I choose something you don't like? I looked at the 2 options in front of me. That was the question I had needed to answer for myself before I could ask anything of her. Then I respect your choice, I said. But we both live with what that choice changes. Sunday afternoon was the first time I walked into Mom's house without feeling like I needed to justify why I was there. She had invited me. Gavin was supposed to be out meeting a client, and when I arrived, Mom opened the door before I touched the keypad. For a second, I remembered standing on the same porch with that faucet in my arms while Gavin blocked the doorway. It felt like months ago instead of weeks. Mom had coffee waiting at the dining table. She looked tired. I probably did too. I don't want to fight, she said before I even sat down. Neither do I? Then please don't give me some ultimatum. I placed my bag beside the chair. I'm not giving you one. She watched me carefully. You said choices. 2 of them. Her expression tightened. That sounds like an ultimatum. Not if I'm willing to accept either answer. That made her pause. I took out 1 sheet of paper. No spreadsheet, no stack of bills. Just 2 paragraphs I had written so I wouldn't let the conversation wander into every argument we'd had since Gavin moved in. The first option is basically the original arrangement, I said. You stay here. I keep paying the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and major property expenses like I promised. You keep contributing toward utilities. Gavin gets a reasonable amount of time to find somewhere else to live. Mom immediately shook her head. He can't afford. Please let me finish. She pressed her lips together. The second option is that you decide you want to live with Gavin permanently. Not temporarily, not until he gets back on his feet. You 2 choose a place together that fits what you can afford. I'll help with a limited amount toward the move and transition. After that, you and Gavin run your household yourselves. She stared at me. And this house? I keep it. For what? For me? She blinked. Of everything I had said, that seemed to surprise her most. You'd live here. When my lease ends, yes. But you bought it for me. I did. So if I choose Gavin, I lose the house. I took a second before answering, because wording mattered. If you choose to build a different permanent household with Gavin, then you're choosing not to continue the original arrangement the house was bought for. That sounds like the same thing. It isn't to me. Of course it isn't. You get the house. The words hurt, but I had expected them. Mom, I already have the house. I own it. What I haven't had is the ability to use it while paying for an arrangement that no longer looks anything like the one we started with. She pushed her chair back slightly. So this whole time you've wanted me out? No. Then why are you suddenly talking about moving in? Because until recently, I never let myself consider what I wanted if you didn't need the house the way you did when I bought it. Mom looked away. I still need somewhere to live. And both choices give you somewhere to live. One of them makes me leave my home, only if living with Gavin permanently matters more to you than staying here under the original arrangement. She looked back at me sharply. You are making me choose between my children? No. I kept my voice calm. I'm asking you to choose how you want to live. That's easy for you to say. It isn't easy at all. Gavin needs help. I know. He's finally building something. I know. And you want me to tell him to leave? Only if you want to stay here under the arrangement I agreed to support. Mom shook her head. You always make things sound so clean. Life isn't one of your project schedules. I know that too. I folded the paper and put it back into my bag. That's why I'm not choosing for you. The front door opened before she could answer. Gavin walked in carrying a laptop bag. He stopped when he saw me. I thought you were meeting alone. We are, Mom said. Apparently not anymore. He dropped his bag beside the sofa. What's going on? Mom rubbed her forehead. Elowen gave me 2 options. His eyes went straight to me. Options. Mom can explain them after we finish. No, I'd like to hear them. Gavin. Mom started. It's fine, I said. I repeated both choices. By the time I finished, his face had gone completely still. So you're kicking me out? No. Option 1 literally says I leave. After a reasonable transition period. And option 2 kicks Mom out too. Option 2 is Mom choosing to live with you somewhere else. He laughed. Once. That's unbelievable. Which part? You're making her choose between us. I looked at Mom. She was staring down at her hands. Mom isn't choosing between us. That is exactly what she's doing. No. She can love both of us under either option. Easy for you to say when you control the property. And you've spent weeks telling me, I shouldn't have any say because I don't live here. His jaw tightened. Because you don't? Then why should I permanently finance the household that does? Because you can afford it. The words came out fast. Automatic. The room went quiet. Gavin seemed to hear himself a second too late. I leaned back. There it is? Don't do that. Do what? Twist what I said. I don't have to twist it. You think my ability to carry something makes it my responsibility to carry it. We're family. So why doesn't your ability matter? I'm building my business. And I hope it works. You don't act like it. Because I won't finance it. He looked at Mom. See. Everything comes back to money. No, I said. Everything comes back to choice. You chose to use the garage for work. You chose better internet. You chose to stay longer than 3 weeks. Mom chose to let you. None of those choices make either of you bad people. But you keep acting like the only choice I'm allowed to make is yes. Gavin opened his mouth, but Mom spoke first. Stop. We both looked at her. She was crying quietly, which immediately made every part of me want to abandon the entire conversation. I almost did. Then she wiped her face and looked at me. Do you know why I always ask you? I frowned. Ask me what? For help. She glanced at Gavin and then back at me. Why I called you about the rent. Why I let you handle Dad's paperwork. Why I called you when the refrigerator broke. Why I expect you to figure things out. I didn't answer. Because you always do. Mom. Gavin struggles. Gavin shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you don't have to. No, she deserves to hear this. Diane took a breath. When you were children, if something went wrong with Gavin, I worried he wouldn't recover from it. With you? She stopped. With me what? I knew you'd be okay. The words landed harder than anything Gavin had said since this started. Mom continued before I could respond. You were always so capable. Even when you were upset, you made a plan. Even when you needed help, you found a way. I thought giving Gavin more support was balancing things. I looked down at the table. Suddenly I was 15 again, working weekends because I wanted spending money while Gavin borrowed Mom's car because he had lost another job. 21, solving my own tuition shortfall because Gavin was going through a bad breakup. 28, arranging Dad's funeral paperwork because Mom couldn't face it and Gavin said he was too overwhelmed. None of those memories made Gavin evil. They just formed a pattern I had never named. So because I could handle more, I said slowly, you gave me more to handle. Mom's face crumpled slightly. I never thought of it that way. I know. And I did know. That was what made it sad instead of satisfying. She hadn't spent 31 years plotting to use me. She had simply trusted my strength so completely that she stopped noticing what it cost. I am okay, I said. But that doesn't mean everything has to become mine to carry. Mom nodded once, staring at the table. Gavin was unusually quiet. After a long moment, Mom said, I want to live with Gavin. I felt something inside me drop, even though I had prepared for exactly that answer. She looked at me quickly, not because I love him more. I know. I hate being alone. He's there. We eat together. We watch television. I sleep better knowing someone else is in the house. She swallowed. And I think he needs me too. I looked at Gavin. For once, he didn't look triumphant. He looked almost embarrassed. I turned back to Mom. Okay. Her eyes widened. Okay? You made your choice. You're not angry. I'm hurt. That's different. Elowen. But I said I would respect your answer. Gavin finally spoke. So what happens now? We agree on a reasonable transition. I'll help Mom with the move the way I promised. You two find somewhere that works for both of you. His expression hardened again. And what happens to the house? That question had been hanging over every conversation for weeks. This time I didn't hesitate. My lease ends in a few months. I'm moving in, Gavin stared at me. So you get what you wanted. No, I stood and picked up my bag. I finally asked myself what I wanted. There's a difference. This whole thing was about getting the house back. I never lost the house. He went silent. That was the power shift neither of us had understood at the beginning. I had spent weeks trying to regain permission, influence, acknowledgement, things Gavin and Mom could withhold. But the decision I actually needed had always been mine. Mom had the right to choose the life she wanted. Gavin had the right to build whatever adult life he could sustain. And I had the right to stop making both choices possible at my expense. I walked toward the front door. Mom followed me. Elowen. I turned. She looked frightened, but not of losing the house anymore. Are we going to be okay? Months earlier, I would have promised her yes immediately because that was what I did. I fixed uncertainty. This time, I gave her the truth. I think we can be, but it's going to have to be different. She nodded slowly. I stepped onto the porch. Behind me, the door remained open. For the first time since Gavin changed the keypad code, I wasn't wondering whether I was allowed inside. I was thinking about what I would do with the place after they left. The first apartment Gavin wanted was almost as expensive as my mortgage. Mom sent me the listing 3 days after our conversation, along with a message that said, "This one looks nice and it's only 15 minutes away." I opened it during lunch. 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, covered parking, renovated kitchen, fitness center, private balcony. Nice was accurate. Affordable was not. I called Mom that evening. "Have you and Gavin made a budget yet?" "He's working on it. Before you look at apartments, you need to know what you can actually spend." "I know, honey." "What's the rent on the one you sent me?" She hesitated. "A little over 2,000. Before utilities." "Yes." "And parking?" "I think so." "And internet?" "Probably." She sighed. "You don't have to make it sound impossible." "I'm not. I'm asking whether it fits the budget." There was a time when that conversation would have ended with me opening my spreadsheet, figuring out the shortfall, and deciding how much I could contribute every month. I could almost feel that old version of myself waiting in the background. Solve it. Make Mom feel safe. Keep everyone calm. Instead, I reminded her of what I had already promised. I would help with a reasonable moving expense and part of the deposit. After that, their household had to work on their income. "Gavin says once his business grows, it won't be an issue," Mom said. "Then maybe choose a place that works before it grows." She went quiet. "You really aren't going to help beyond what you said." It wasn't exactly a question. "I am helping exactly the way I said." "I know." She sounded disappointed, but she didn't argue. That was new. Over the next 2 weeks, reality did what I never could have done through another family confrontation. It put prices next to everything. Gavin wanted a second bedroom large enough to use as an office. That increased the rent. He wanted high-speed internet because of his freelance work. That cost extra. He wanted covered parking. Extra. The apartment complex he liked charged for trash service, package handling, and pet rent because Tessa had started talking about bringing her dog over regularly. Every preference that had seemed small inside my house suddenly had a monthly number attached to it. Mom called me after their 3rd apartment tour. I had no idea renting had gotten this expensive. "That's why I bought the house." The words came out before I could stop them. Silence followed. I regretted the edge immediately. But I didn't apologize for the fact itself. Mom finally said, "I know." 2 days later, Gavin called me. It was the first time he had contacted me since the decision without sounding angry. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "How much did you say you'd help with for the move?" I repeated the amount. "Does that include the deposit?" "It's the total amount I'm contributing. You can use it toward the deposit or moving costs however you want." "What if the deposit is higher?" "Then you and Mom cover the difference." He exhaled. "Right." I waited. "We found a place," he said. "Okay? It's smaller." "Is Mom comfortable with it?" "Yeah, I think so." "Then that sounds like a good start." Another pause. "You don't have to sound so pleased." "I'm not pleased that you have to downsize, Gavin." "Sure. I mean it. Then what are you pleased about?" I thought before answering. That the numbers belong to the people making the decision now. He didn't respond for several seconds. You really can't let that go. I'm trying to let exactly that go. He ended the call soon afterward. The apartment they chose was a 2-bedroom unit about 20 minutes from the house. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and close enough that Mom wouldn't have to change doctors or leave the neighborhood groups she liked. Gavin complained about the second bedroom being too small for his equipment until the leasing agent explained what a larger floor plan would cost. Suddenly, the smaller room became workable. The premium internet he had once described as absolutely necessary became something he compared across 3 providers, looking for the cheapest deal. He skipped covered parking. He decided he could move most of the furniture himself instead of hiring movers for everything. None of that made me happy because Gavin was struggling. What satisfied me was something more specific. For the first time, he was making trade-offs instead of handing the trade-offs to me. I stayed mostly out of the apartment search after that. Mom still called me, but I stopped answering every question with a solution. When she asked which electricity provider to choose, I told her what I knew and let her and Gavin decide. When she asked whether I thought they needed renter's insurance, I told her yes and sent her the information to compare policies herself. Small things, ordinary things. But each one reminded me how much invisible work I had been doing for years. Gavin also started taking more freelance projects. I knew because Mom mentioned that he was working late most nights. One afternoon, she said almost casually, "He's busier than I realized he could be." I didn't say anything. "I think maybe he needed the pressure," she added. "Maybe." "You knew that, didn't you?" "No. I knew I needed to stop being the pressure release valve." Mom went quiet. "That's a very Elowen way to say it." I laughed softly, probably. Moving day came 6 weeks after Mom made her choice. I arrived at 8 in the morning with coffee and packing tape. I had promised to help, and keeping my boundary didn't mean I wanted them to struggle unnecessarily. Gavin had rented a truck. Tessa was helping. Mom had packed most of the kitchen herself. For several hours, we worked almost normally. Boxes went out. Furniture went out. Gavin's equipment disappeared from the garage piece by piece. I stood there at one point looking at the empty wall where Dad's cabinet used to be. Gavin noticed. "You still have that thing?" "Yeah." "Where?" "Storage," he nodded. "It'll fit there again." It wasn't an apology, but it was the first time he had acknowledged that the garage might become mine again without making a sarcastic comment. "That's the plan," I said. By late afternoon, only a few boxes remained. Mom walked slowly through each room. I stayed near the front door and gave her time. When she came back, her eyes were wet. "This feels strange." "I know. I really loved this place." "I know that too." She ran her hand along the wall near the doorway. "I thought this house was what you gave me." I understood what she meant. To her, the house had become the physical proof that she would always be safe. Somewhere along the way, that safety had expanded in her mind to include whatever choices she made inside it. I said. "Then, why does leaving feel like I'm giving something back?" I looked at her for a moment. "Because maybe we both confused the house with the promise." "What was the promise?" "That I wouldn't let you face everything alone after Dad died." Her eyes filled again, and now. "No, you chose to build a household with Gavin. I'm still your daughter. I'm still here, but I can't make every choice safe by paying for whatever comes with it." She nodded slowly. Then she said something I hadn't expected. "I think I made being strong very expensive for you." My throat tightened. "Sometimes." "I'm sorry, it wasn't a dramatic apology." She didn't list every mistake or suddenly agree with every decision I had made. She just stood there in the nearly empty hallway and finally acknowledged the cost. I reached for her hand. "We'll figure out what comes next." "Different?" she asked. "Definitely different." Gavin called from outside that they were ready. Mom picked up her purse. then stopped at the threshold. I thought giving me this house meant it was mine. I wanted it to feel like yours. Maybe that's where I got confused. Maybe we both did. She looked at me. I thought about the keypad, the bills, the contractor, all the times I had tried to prove that my contribution should earn me a voice. I didn't need to prove it anymore. I gave you a home, Mom, I said quietly. I didn't give away myself with it. She squeezed my hand once and walked outside. I stood on the porch as the truck pulled away. No victory speech, no begging. Gavin wasn't ruined, Mom wasn't abandoned. They had simply chosen a life together, and now they were responsible for building it. I went back inside. The house was almost completely silent. On the kitchen counter sat a small envelope with my name on it. Inside was the final $90 payment Gavin owed from the garage work, and a note with 4 words were square on this. I smiled despite myself. Then I walked to the front door and looked at the keypad. For months, that little lock had represented everything I thought I had lost. Standing there alone, I realized I didn't feel triumphant. I felt lighter. In a few months, when my lease ended, I would move into this house. I would bring Dad's cabinet back. I would decide what happened in the garage. And for the first time since I bought the place, I would build a life here that wasn't organized entirely around what somebody else needed from me. I moved into the house 4 months later. By then, Mom and Gavin had settled into their apartment, my lease was ending, and the place no longer felt like the center of an argument every time I pulled into the driveway. Still, on my first morning there, I stood in the kitchen drinking coffee from a paper cup, because I hadn't unpacked the mugs yet, and I felt strangely guilty. The house was quiet. Not lonely, just quiet. For years, whenever I pictured this place, I pictured Mom in it, her plants in the windows, her coat hanging by the door, her grocery list stuck to the refrigerator. Even though my name had always been on the paperwork, emotionally I had trained myself to think of the house as something that belonged to everyone except me. That took time to undo. I didn't remodel everything or erase every trace of Mom and Gavin. I changed the bedroom, moved some furniture, painted one wall, and replaced the dining room light fixture I had never liked. Small choices. Mine. The garage took longer. After Gavin moved his equipment out, it looked bigger than I remembered. There were marks where shelves had been removed and a few patched sections along the wall. One Saturday morning, I drove to the storage locker and brought Dad's cabinet home. Getting it into the garage by myself was harder than I expected. Halfway through, I nearly dropped one end and laughed because I could practically hear Dad telling me I was trying to prove something by refusing to ask for help. I called Merrin. She arrived 40 minutes later with iced coffee and no sympathy. You know, normal people ask for help before the furniture is halfway out of the car. That seems inefficient. You are exhausting. Together, we moved the cabinet against the wall where it had originally stood. The scratch from Gavin's storage unit was still visible near one corner. I considered sanding it out. Then I decided not to. The cabinet had survived being unwanted for a while. So had I. It didn't need to look untouched to belong there. Things with Mom improved more slowly. For the first month after the move, we spoke maybe twice a week. Most conversations stayed safely on ordinary topics. Her apartment, work, groceries, a neighbor she found annoying. She didn't ask me for money. I didn't ask whether Gavin was paying his share. That was probably healthy for both of us. Then one evening she mentioned that Gavin had picked up 2 new clients and was working more than he ever had at the house. He complains about the rent every month, she said. Welcome to adulthood, I replied before I could stop myself. Mom laughed. Actually laughed. I told him something similar. That surprised me. You did. Not in those words. Probably wise. She hesitated. He's paying his half. I looked around my kitchen. Good. That's all you're going to say? What else should I say? I don't know. I thought maybe you'd say you told us so. Would it help? No. Then I won't. There was a small silence. Thank you, she said. Gavin and I weren't suddenly close. I didn't expect us to be. But the hostility faded once we stopped fighting over a shared arrangement. He sent the final contractor payment on time. A few weeks later, he texted me asking whether I still had the contact information for Ray. My first instinct was to ask why. Then I realized it wasn't my problem unless he planned to send Ray back to my garage. I sent the number. Gavin replied, "Thanks, that was it." Strangely, it felt healthier than most of our conversations during the previous 6 months. He asked for information. I gave it. Nobody attached an obligation to it. The biggest change was harder to notice because it happened in tiny moments. Mom started asking instead of assuming. When her car needed new tires, she called and said, "Do you know a place you trust?" Instead of, "Can you handle this for me?" When she needed help moving a bookshelf, she asked whether I was free instead of telling me which Saturday worked best. Sometimes I helped. Sometimes I couldn't. The first time I told her I was busy, and she simply said, "Okay, I'll ask Gavin." I sat there staring at my phone after we hung up. Nothing bad happened. Nobody accused me of being selfish. The problem got solved without me. It sounds ridiculous that something so ordinary felt like progress. But it did. About 3 months after I moved in, Mom called on a Thursday evening. "Are you home Saturday?" she asked. I was sorting laundry on the couch. "Probably. Why?" "I'd like to come over." My hands stopped. There was nothing unusual about the request, except for the way she had phrased it. She was asking, not announcing that she was coming, not assuming she still had access because she used to live there. Asking. For one brief, embarrassing second, I thought about saying, "You'll need permission." The sentence appeared in my head almost exactly the way Gavin had said it to me. I could have turned the entire story around with 6 words. I could have made Mom feel what I felt standing on that porch with a faucet in my hands. And then I realized I didn't want to. If getting my power back meant using it exactly the way Gavin had, then I hadn't learned much. "Come around 11, I said. "I'll make lunch." "That sounds nice." Saturday morning, I cleaned more than necessary. At 10:58, I saw Mom's car pull into the driveway. She walked up the path carrying a small grocery bag and stopped at the front door. I watched through the kitchen window as she looked at the keypad. For 18 months, she had known the code. Now she didn't. She could have knocked immediately, but she stood there for a moment, almost like she was waiting for the house to tell her what her relationship with it had become. I opened the door. "You know there's a doorbell." She smiled. "I know." She held up the bag. "I brought that bread you like. Then you're definitely allowed in." She laughed and stepped inside. Her eyes moved around the living room, taking in the small changes. "It looks good." "Thanks." "Different." "A little." We ate lunch at the dining table. She told me about Gavin's work. I told her about a restaurant project that had gone 3 weeks over schedule because someone ordered the wrong ventilation system. Eventually she wandered into the garage. She stopped when she saw Dad's cabinet. "You brought it back?" "Yeah." She ran her fingers over the top. "Your father loved that thing." "He loved making me redo the corners." Mom smiled. "He said you rushed them." "I did." She looked at the scratch on the side. "Are you going to fix that?" "Probably not." "Why?" I shrugged. "It's part of what happened to it." Mom looked at me for a second, and I had the feeling we both knew we weren't talking only about the cabinet. When she was getting ready to leave, I walked her to the front door. Then I stopped beside the keypad. "Mom." "Hum. Your old code doesn't work anymore." Her expression shifted slightly. "I figured. Can give you the new one." She looked surprised. "You don't have to." "I know." That was exactly why I wanted to. I told her the numbers. She repeated them once to remember. Then she looked at me. "Should I still call before I come?" "Yes." She nodded. No argument, no hurt expression. Just yes. I leaned against the doorway. "The code means you're welcome. It doesn't mean we stop asking each other." Mom's eyes softened. "I understand that now." I believed her. Not because she had apologized perfectly. Not because Gavin had suddenly become a different person. Not because everything that happened had been erased. I believed her because our behavior had changed. That mattered more than speeches. After she drove away, I stayed on the porch for a while. I thought about the morning Gavin changed the code and told me I needed permission to visit. Back then, I thought the locked door was the injustice. It wasn't. The real problem was how easily my family had come to believe that my reliability belonged to them. My money, my time, my ability to fix things, my willingness to absorb one more problem because everyone knew I would probably be okay. I was still dependable. I still helped Mom. I still loved my brother, even if loving him looked different now. What changed was that I stopped treating my strength like a family resource anyone could withdraw whenever they needed it. The house taught me something I probably should have learned years earlier. A boundary isn't a locked door. Sometimes it's the reason you can safely open one. And if someone you love has ever treated your generosity like something they were entitled to, I'd be curious to know what finally made you stop saying yes.